Gotta let me know. Good evening, everyone. Buenas noches. How's everybody doing? For real? For real? How's everybody doing? That sounds a lot better. Welcome to the People's Forum. My name is Claudia de la Cruz. It's a pleasure for us to have you in the space. Before we get started with introducing the panelists and framing what we're going to be talking about tonight, I have two announcements to make. The first one is that if you are not a Spanish speaker, we will have a Spanish intervention. And so we have translation equipment in the front that you all could get. And we have an amazing interpreter in the back, who's Ruben, who will be doing the interpretation for us tonight. Let's give it up for the interpreter. Very, very important role, which also means please speak slowly so that he could do his job well. And that is also a reminder to myself because I tend to speak very fast. We also have an open mic. Where's Tahia? She was just here. Tahia's in the front. And she will be taking up names of folks that want to perform in the open mic afterwards. You don't have to claim to be an artist. You just have to have something to say about what's happening in the world. So please sign yourself up. Use that as your soapbox. We are happy to hear you. All right? All right. So as we all know, we are living in very, very dire moments of crisis at all levels, not only nationally, but also internationally. And when the system, the economic system in which we live, which is capitalism, we all know that, right? Globally, happens to go into crisis, those who suffer the most are those who are already at the poorest, most marginalized of the spaces. And it is unfortunate to say that women and transgender non-conforming communities are those of the majority of people who are suffering in the deep crisis that we are experiencing globally and nationally. What that also means is that whatever rights we have been able to advance as a people in terms of struggle, the title of tonight's panel is very, very key. Dare to win, the struggles for reproductive justice. Whatever we've won through our struggles are the first things that are attacked by capitalist states. The issue of abortion rights is not a new one. We actually were able to access rights around the reproductive health system through struggle, and it is that is being dismantled little by little all throughout the United States. And when we're talking about reproductive health, we know that it's not only of impact to a small community. We're talking about, again, women, trans, gender non-conforming folks, but we're talking about children. We're talking about partnerships. We're talking about families. And we're talking about the choice and options that people may or may not have to be able to decide about their livelihoods. And so it's a larger issue of human rights. And I'm very, very excited to be sitting here amongst human rights defenders, because the issue of reproductive justice is not an issue isolated from human rights. That's what we're talking about here. And these are folks that have dared to win through struggle. So I want you all to welcome our panelists. And so I'll share a little bit about the methodology. What we're gonna do tonight is I will introduce each one of them and their organization. Each of them will have an intervention of about 10 minutes. Then we will go into a Q&A, and we will leave here informed enough to go share with other people what we've learned. Does that sound right? I like the last part. Let's commit to that. That's the most important piece. All right, so on this panel we have, I don't know if I presented myself, but my name is Claudia. On this panel, you have Claudia de la Cruz from the People's Forum. I was tasked with moderating tonight, and it's my absolute privilege to introduce Elizabeth Birriel from Breaking the Chains magazine, amazing Kelsey Mclean from Yellowhammer Fund, Cupertina Munoz from the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, and Anka Khan from the Audrey Lorde Project. All right, so are we ready to hear some powerful stuff? Because I'm ready. I'm ready. I know we were all born ready for this. So Elizabeth is going to share some of the history in relationship to reproductive health and reproductive justice, to be able to understand the current context, to be able to understand what's happening now. We need to be able to get a little bit of history. And so, Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Is this good? Can y'all hear me all right? All right, I haven't been on a mic for a minute, so the nerves. But I want to just express my gratitude for being a part of such an important conversation and to be able to share this panel experience with all of you. And I want to go ahead and start off, like Claudia mentioned, on what's happening with abortion rights. And you know, Claudia alluded to how abortion was legalized in 1973 through the passage of Roe v. Wade that legalized abortion in the United States. But what Claudia said that's super critical for us not to forget is that that happened because there was tremendous organizing across the entire country in defense of abortion rights. And that level of organizing applied the political pressure needed to make sure that this right was secured. And you know, we support Roe and we defend Roe, but we also have to understand its limitations. And what I mean by that is that, you know, Roe in itself does not protect and guarantee abortion as a human right for all people. Instead, what it does is protect the right to privacy and offers kind of this sort of balance between the state's intervention of protecting unborn life. And so in essence, Roe, all it does is says, we'll protect your right to choose up until viability of a fetus, which right now under Roe is 24 weeks, but the states could intervene. And we've seen that happen throughout the last 2 decades, where the state by state dismantling of abortion rights has taken place. I also want to talk about access, right? Because we have this notion of a right, but the access is like remotely not there. And I say this because, you know, only 90% of counties in the United States do not have an abortion provider. At the same time, public insurance plans do not cover abortion. And there's all this red tape and restrictions that force so many clinics to shut down. So in essence, the right to access to abortion is blocked. And, you know, this right only becomes really accessible to people who could afford to get an abortion. And like many other rights under capitalism, right? Unless you have money, you actually don't have the right to anything but be poor. I also want to talk about these same clinics that have been closing and the importance that they play in communities where, you know, we have extreme poverty or people's status and immigration status and documentation prevents them from getting the care that they needed in so many different places, especially in the South, where these same clinics, you know, weren't only just offering abortion services, they're offering, you know, critical cancer screenings, gynecology exams, you know, gender transformation and hormone therapy, and all of these things are now being stripped away. And it means like that access is severely reduced. But nonetheless, I do want to acknowledge that Roe is a significant win, and a significant win for millions of people across the United States. And it's been under attack since day one. And I just want to emphasize that, the struggle today on abortion is not about religion, is not about morality, and that's the picture that is painted by mainstream media and politicians. But the reality is that the struggle for abortion is absolutely 100% about bodily control. And, behind the people who are driving to outlaw abortion, they think that women and other people who are able to be pregnant, that they aren't entitled to autonomy over their bodies. And certainly no one, not women, not anyone in the LGBTQAI plus spectrum, especially not trans people, can be equal members of society if they can't control the autonomy over their own bodies. And so, it comes down to the same state of Texas putting us back where we were 50 years ago and trying to criminalize and ban abortion. And once again, we have to use that same people's power to fight back. I want to talk about also why this is happening, because I think that is an important, context on why is abortion even an issue? We have to understand this struggle from a class perspective. And we can't separate abortion from class analysis, we just can't. And I say that because every time the ruling class feels threatened, whether it's through losing control in the face of powerful social movements or tremendous instability, it turns towards a reactionary agenda. And this happened in the 70s. We had a strong civil rights movement, a Black liberation movement, a anti-war movement, a women's rights movement, at the same time where poverty was also growing. And what happened was that the right started to organize the Republican Party under this notion of, quote, moral majority. And that movement was sort of to champion so-called family values, but it was actually a way to avoid meaningful material solutions and resources to solve the hardships and problems created by the capitalist system itself. And this is how abortion became a focal point in the political arena. And at this time, abortion was identified as, a weak spot in the women's movement because it was secured through the Supreme Court versus legislation being passed to legalize abortion at a federal level. And so with the existing opposition from religious groups, the Republicans just capitalized on that momentum and knew that they could mobilize that to build their constituency, but also, there were big parts of the country where abortion rights didn't exist and all of a sudden existed, but the movement wasn't strong in those places to defend it. And I'm pretty sure if you ask any activist that was around in the 70s, if they would have ever thought that Roe v. Wade could be overturned, they would probably say no, but here we are today. And like so many other rights that we've gained through struggle, they face that same threat, and we have to understand that we have to fight back and push back. The right to have an abortion, if we think about it in itself, could fundamentally just change the power dynamics of the family in general, right? It's a cultural revolution that essentially smashes patriarchy on its head. And that poses a little bit of chaos for the system. It doesn't want that division to not exist. And so in short, the topic of abortion now becomes something that is not only a local and state electoral issue, but now it becomes a federal political arena. And there's this whole extravaganza that's also behind it. And it's the way for the Republican Party to portray the Democrats that are pro-choice as baby killers and linking them to the decline of the family. It operates in the same way as we see the escalating attacks on the LGBTQ community and how they've been targeted in so many different states with all of these different disgusting legislations that are being passed. It's just that these different issues in itself, we have to understand that they in themselves don't threaten the capitalist profit motive, but they do provide a vehicle for different sectors of the capitalist ruling class to lean on these powerful superstructures, such as churches, to consolidate their own legitimacy and to distract their constituency from the social and economic concerns that politicians have no desire to address. And instead, they can refocus their energy to push the things that they do care about, like cutting social spending. Like, we can't even get a full-blown Build Back Better bill passed without it being gutted to the bare minimum, to the crumbs that they want to push forward, but they're so quick to roll back all of government regulations that would maximize profits for these corporations. So it's just a way to deflect and deviate from their real priorities and their real agenda. I want to just go ahead and also just go into actually what's happening today. And I will say that, you know, some of the more mainstream women organizations, they've kind of thrown in the towel and have chosen to take a more of a mitigating approach to the damage as it's happening through like the legal battle. Instead of mobilizing masses of people into the streets to fight these accelerating attacks on abortion rights. And like I mentioned earlier, like over the last 2 decades, we've seen that increase of attacks on abortion, but over the last 2 to 3 years, that has intensified immensely. Like, we're talking about overturning Roe with Mississippi, Texas with its SB 8 law, it being mimicked in Florida and in Idaho, and even alone in this year, you know, we already had New Hampshire, which I would not think, for whatever reason, I don't know why I thought this, but New Hampshire definitely passed restrictions on abortion. Idaho, as of yesterday, signed into law banning abortion. Kentucky, and it's just like all of these states keep increasing their restrictions on reproductive access and reproductive justice, and your ability to decide what to do with your body and your decision to have a family. And at that same time, the Democrats are just sitting on the sidelines. And they claim that they can't do nothing. Year after year, they say the same stuff and that their hands are tied. And meanwhile, they try to give the impression that they had something to do with Roe v. Wade in passing, similar to like every other social movement they like try to take credit for. But what have they actually done? Like, let's look at their track record. Like in 1976, the Hyde Amendment was passed by a bipartisan vote. Bill Clinton gutted the welfare system. And since 1973, like, they had ample chances to pass federal legislation that would legalize abortion. And in response, what they've done in this recent heightened attacks is basically they're just sat on the sidelines. Like, how many times did Texas go to court and the appeals court and the Supreme Court and back and forth, and nothing's being done? And what really sucks is that they had the opportunity to pass legislation and they failed to pass the Women's Health Protection Act in the Senate. And following a few days later, Biden had his State of the Union and never mentioned abortion at once. I don't even think this dude has mentioned the word abortion since he's become the president. And so I want to just emphasize that what actually could the Women's Health Protection Act had accomplished if it would have been passed. It would have actually guaranteed abortion rights nationally, no matter what the Supreme Court ruled. It would have neutralized the 19 plus states that are restricting and opposing abortion. It would have prohibited these crazy policies that make no sense, that you have to have this regulation and that regulation and these crazy waiting periods, which are so hurtful to working class women who can't afford to leave their jobs, their children, and travel to another state for days to get an abortion. I mean, they really set up this law to fail. Like, they brought it up for vote on February 28th, knowing that it wouldn't pass, which it didn't, just to get it on the record, just to be opportunistic for the midterm elections and say, I was for this issue, I voted for it, and it is not even acknowledging the fact that they set it up to absolutely fail. And I say that they set it up to fail because they didn't fight for abortion access, they refused to fight for dismantling the filibuster, and they also refused to censor, deny funds to, or organize vote outs for Senator Manchin and Sinema. Like, they did nothing. They absolutely didn't even call for their constituents to go out in the streets for this. And so it just shows that, we can't rely on the politicians. We can't rely just on the legal system. Like, we do have to have people out in the streets. And just the thought of overthrowing Roe, we have to think about the importance and significance of what that means and the disruption that it can actually cause to the capitalist system. Because we know without a shadow of the doubt that the Supreme Court is a political body, not just an ideological body, and it has historically been moved by political pressure in a progressive direction despite its reactionary force. And with that, we need everyone out in the streets, the same millions of women and allies that were out in the streets organizing for abortion rights, to once again come out in the streets and march. And I'm just gonna end with, acknowledging the fact that we have truth on our side and we have solutions for our future. And while Texas is leading attacks on abortion rights, it's the same state that let people freeze to death. It's the same state that had literally no support from the government or for infrastructures and families a year ago. Like, that's just so criminal in itself. It's one of the worst states, if not the worst states, to live in terms of having funding for schools, for children, for access to healthcare for women, and for having the highest rates of child hunger. And those are the facts. And these are the same worthless politicians who have zero interest in protecting the lives of people who are here, born, living and breathing, who have the audacity to claim that they want to protect the life of an unborn. They don't care what happens to that child when it comes into the world and into fruition and what that means. The truth is that the ruling class has no program to deal with the problems that it's created by cutting corners to maximize its profits. And so all they can do is keep us divided. And we have and we must resist this. Abortion is a women's issue. It's an issue for trans men and for gender non-conforming people who can become pregnant. But most importantly, is everyone's issue. Attacks on abortion is part of a campaign against the working class. The same right-wing forces making these cookie-cutter laws and legislations opposing critical race theory, union rights, gender-affirming healthcare, environmental safeguards, and voting rights are the same people writing anti-abortion laws and pushing to get them passed in all 50 states. And our movement faces some severe important challenges that we have to overcome. And one is just a total lack of understanding of the human reproductive system, especially by the politicians. Like, if y'all see what's happening in Missouri, like, they straight up want to criminalize your inability to actually pass your egg from your fallopian tube to have a baby. Like, you will die. Like, medically, there is no way for you to survive that, and yet somehow it's now being criminalized. The same way that miscarriages are being criminalized by so many different states. And the other aspect of it is the lack of a winning program, a winning political program that meets the needs of society. And so all of these different issues are being broken up, and we have to challenge that by building consciousness and an understanding that the attacks on abortion rights are in larger part an attack on the working class, and not just women, and not just those people who can become pregnant, but it's a way to undermine our class and a way to undermine the rights to choose our own destiny and to recreate a world in the vision that we think will benefit society by reallocating the resources and wealth that we have, that we can do so. And I'm not just talking about the resources here in the United States, because we do have to understand that we live in a global economy, and the impact that labor and resources and the exploitation of those resources by the capitalist class impacts the globe. I think it's super critical that we have our own resources. Shout out to the People's Forum for providing that space for us to have these conversations, to all of the different publications that are out there, because we have to build collective consciousness, and we have to challenge this notion of morality and shaming that is imposed on the abortion topic, and we have to tell our stories. So we can't take this all is lost attitude in this struggle. We have to continue to mobilize in the streets and educate our people on all the struggles that we're facing. And to win the rights that we know we deserve, we have to be creative, we have to be determined, and we can never give up.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So next we'll have Kelsey, who will be speaking to the conditions of our folks in the South in relationship to reproductive health and reproductive justice. So welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you. So my name is Kelsey Mclean. I'm currently based in Durham, North Carolina, but I work remotely supporting the Yellowhammer Fund, which is an abortion fund and reproductive justice organization serving the state of Alabama and pretty much right now the region. I'm like, yeah, like, yes, all of that. That's it, what you just heard. And to really kind of put a lot of that into the reality of how all of these attacks on access are impacting people. A really common thing we say at Yellowhammer Fund and genuinely abortion funds across the South say is that the South has been post-Roe. What everyone is fearing right now, which is coming in June, is a reality for a lot of Southerners. It's a reality I faced when I needed an abortion and couldn't afford it. And it's a reality that's just going to intensify and increase and continue to impact people that are living in the margins already. Yellowhammer Fund right now, we receive anywhere from 50 to 75 new calls a week from people that are either needing help finding a clinic that can help them with an abortion or actually help paying for that care. We are now getting calls from Tennessee, Mississippi. We've been getting calls from Mississippi for a long time. Louisiana and Texas. Texas, I'm getting about 2 to 3 calls from Texans a day. And let me tell you, Alabama is not easy to get to. We are not a state that has a really great travel infrastructure. There's some Amtrak lines, but Amtrak isn't already really a reliable source of transportation for a lot of people in the South. Bus lines are non-existent in many communities. Long distance buses usually aren't that accessible or even affordable for people. And I think on average, people are usually having to drive 8 to 10 hours to access clinics in Alabama when they're coming from out of state. I would say probably half of my calls come from Mississippi. Mississippians have to travel into our state frequently, either because of lack of appointment availability. They maybe have had an abortion before and they're uncomfortable visiting the same clinic due to abortion stigma, which is something I definitely will talk about a little bit. And or just people that have already hit the state's gestational limit, and gestational limits are probably the number one driving force behind people having to travel for care. When we're speaking with people at Yellowhammer, it's really important that we don't ask a lot of questions about your finances, because we recognize that the ability to pay for an abortion doesn't look like having a job or not having a job, living in poverty or not living in poverty, or meeting those federal poverty guidelines, which are absolute total bullshit. average pledge that we make is about $100 to $200, depending on the person's amount of need and the facility they're visiting and the method of care that they're choosing. And that's probably only covering about a quarter to a third of the cost for them, if that. Sometimes it's like a fifth to a seventh of the cost, depending on how many weeks they're measuring. I would say the average abortion in Alabama costs anywhere from like $700 to $900, and that is if you are able to get into a clinic before you hit the second trimester. Later abortion happens for a variety of reasons, and I'll tell you, in Alabama, the majority of time when people haven't been able to get into a clinic, it's because they just couldn't afford the abortion and they had no idea how to reach out to anyone for help. They didn't even think that there would be an organization like this that would exist, or they've wasted weeks and weeks of time like calling the Medicare office and being like, does my Medicaid cover this, or my Medicare? I always use the wrong word. Does my health insurance cover this, if they are lucky enough to have health insurance? Alabama attempted an abortion ban back in 2019. That was when really Yellowhammer, this is the lovely but terrible thing about abortion bans, is it really like stimulates people to start looking for ways to give back and fight against the problem. So abortion funds will usually see this like huge, like just flush of money when these abortion bans are announced or even passed. But that also comes with this like wave of awareness from our community, right? And they're now aware that Yellowhammer exists. Like, we've done media, we've done news, they've seen us like on the nightly news. And that increased our call volume substantially. We were able to set up agreements with clinics. And one of the things that I think is not unique to us as an abortion fund, but we have to network with clinics out of state. And we currently work with clinics in Atlanta, Washington, D.C., Illinois, New Mexico, and Colorado. And the main reason for a lot of those states is those are areas where people can go when they have simply timed out of being able to access care in their state, usually about 21 weeks and 6 days of gestation. When someone is facing out-of-state care, they're usually facing a price tag of anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 or more that they will have to pay out of pocket. And if you thought that $700 amount was really shocking and upsetting and something that you were like, that would be impossible for me or would absolutely drain what little I have in my savings, like, imagine what $5,000 to $10,000 or more would do to you. And that is not including the cost of your travel. The fact that you are going to have to leave, most likely, your children and your family behind, and your job, your way to earn income. I've worked with people who have lost their jobs due to pregnancy, even though that is wildly illegal to fire someone for being pregnant. No one cares that that's illegal. And that happens all the time, especially to hourly wage workers who already don't have a lot of advantages in the workplace. Most people that are contacting us, they are not able to take paid time off. They don't have any kind of health savings account that they can tap into to pay for their, aftercare medications, their ibuprofen, to buy a heating pad. They're not able to afford the childcare that they need to ensure that they can go through a medication abortion process without children climbing all over them and demanding attention when all they need is their body to go through this miscarriage process. One thing that we're really preparing for in Alabama is the reality that people are going to be attempting to self-manage and end their pregnancies on their own. And that's something that's going to be, I think, ultimately facing a lot of criminalization and going to be a way for states to try and regain the control that they're already exerting on our bodies, right? Like, that's the whole point of this, is control. Like, our bodies aren't ours. And the second we figure out a way around their rules, they're going to come harder for us. We've already had people in Alabama and other states in the South who have been thrown in jail because they either attempted to self-manage their abortions or their miscarriages, or worse, they suffered a miscarriage by no fault of their own, but because they had substance abuse or substance use issues, that was something that immediately deemed them as at fault and culpable in the loss of that pregnancy, even though there's no evidence or proof towards that. It's been really hard and difficult going through this pandemic. and knowing that a lot of the realities that were created for people when there were job shutdowns and mass layoffs and sick time getting used up if you had sick time and people experiencing chronic illness for the first time in their lives, it was just amplified on our hotline. Everyone that called us verbalized COVID as one of these symptoms leading to why they needed to either have an abortion or reach out to us for care. On that point, I think it's really important to understand that there are, like, if people are uncomfortable with abortion, which I am not one of those people that wants to reduce the number of abortions, like that does not matter to me. I don't care what your reasons, and I don't think we'll ever get rid of abortion. That's never gonna happen, no matter how many social programs and safety nets you've set up as a society. There's always gonna be someone that just freaking gets pregnant and they don't wanna be pregnant anymore, and abortion is the way that they will no longer be pregnant anymore. But I would like to see that people are not having to make abortion choices because they know that that child is going to be the final nail in the coffin of, I can't make my rent payments anymore, and I'm no longer going to have a roof over my children and my family's heads, because that's a reality. I hear that verbalized to people all the time. I would love it when people would call me and be like, you know what, I'm having this abortion because my partner just died and I can't even get enough time off of work because I need to work to make up his income to even think about if I can have this child right now, right? I would love it if people just were able to get bereavement leave, and that was a built-in thing to any job. So people had the space and comfort to figure out, do I want to bring this child into the world when my partner is not here to help me raise it? Is this something I want to do? So often the state is not only, the state that is so interested in preventing an abortion is often forcing people's choices and decisions. The calls I get from people that are later in their pregnancies and have been given a diagnosis of either a fetal anomaly that would mean that there's significant medical challenges ahead for this child, or something that is not compatible with life, they often don't have the luxury of time and space to figure out what is the best path forward for them. Do they want to carry the pregnancy into its natural conclusion? Do they want to choose a termination? Do they want to explore their options for termination? Because there are options available to people who are experiencing pregnancy loss if they need to go through a wanted termination. And especially in Alabama and Georgia, where we have these cutoffs, all too often I hear from people that they're really stressed out and frustrated, and they'll call us and they'll be like, I'm canceling the appointment, I'm keeping the appointment, I'm canceling the appointment. And ultimately, they're at peace with their decision, but they're not at peace with how quickly they had to make it. And that was taken from them by a state that claims it's pro-life. One thing I kind of touched on, and that'll be kind of the thing I end on, is the impact that stigma plays into all of this, which is huge. I myself am someone that has had an abortion, and I've had abortions, and my first abortion, it was so deeply shaped and impacted by stigma and shame that some of it was self-imposed, but I think a lot of it was that fear of judgment from my allies and from my friends. And I was someone who did sex ed in college. I was the, girl that had the condoms on her coffee table and threw them at people on campus. And I knew how to prevent pregnancy, right? But I just didn't do it. I just didn't do it. I got a little blasé and was like, you know what? My body's just going to shut this thing down. That was, I think, a quote from somebody at one point. But I just got complacent with how my body worked and how pregnancy worked. And I forgot that all our bodies want to do is make little versions of us to go forth and make more little versions of us when it's appropriate. And my body didn't really care what my brain wanted. And I spent several weeks in this deep, dark place where I had decided that this was my burden to carry. This was my responsibility, that I was going to end this pregnancy quietly. I was not going to tell my loving partner. I was not going to tell my loving parent, the person who had raised me to be supportive of abortion rights and access. I was just going to do it on my own. And then I called the clinic, and they told me that'll be $500, please. And as someone who was living on unemployment and had just actually sent my last bit of money to my health insurance company so they wouldn't cut off my benefits, I had no way to pay for my abortion, and I had health insurance that laughed at me when I called them and asked me if they would pay for it. So I started attempting ways to end my pregnancy on my own, and I attempted a few different herbal methods. And I don't think I was really scared to even reach out to anyone, so I didn't consult with an herbalist. And because of that, I was really scared that I was going to kill myself because I knew that that's not something you should mess with without a professional's help. So I attempted it for a few weeks, and it did not make me feel great. My body felt really bad. I don't know if it was the pregnancy or what I was putting into my body in really high doses. So I ultimately told my partner and my mother out of desperation of no longer wanting to be pregnant and being absolutely miserable. So for me, it's very personal. I realize that it takes a lot for people to even get to the point where they dial the number that reaches me. I respect that people bring a lot of emotions to that. And what I would love to see is work happen to ensure that we all know we have a safe place to land when we need to have an abortion. There's a lot of ways we can do that. Social media, a blessing and a curse. But in this regard, there's a lot of ways that you can talk about abortion, and you can talk about abortion in really affirming and destigmatizing ways. Of course, it's not always safe for us to publicly discuss our feelings about this, but if it is safe and it's just a matter of discomfort, I really encourage people to push really past that moment of discomfort, have those uncomfortable conversations with people that are going to call you a baby killer, because the reality is that those words probably hurt a little bit, but they hurt a lot less if you're not currently going through the situation that people are calling you a baby killer about. In my volunteer time back in North Carolina, I volunteer and organize a group that does clinic defense at local clinics. And we're out there because the worst and ugliest version and form of that stigma shows up in front of the clinics, cloaks itself in faith and godless, I mean it is, but faithfulness. They cloak it in God, and they abuse people. And I would love us to get to a point where that is completely unthinkable. Here, I don't know what kind of problems you have in New York City with that. I actually think one of our protest movements called Love Life, the most toxic thing in the world, has spread here. And we're very sorry. Not really, it's not our fault, but we're very sorry. It's unfortunate. But I would love to see it if, cities and communities, like just now, I think it was Oregon, I could be wrong, but a state out west that passed a resolution that they were going to fund abortion and fund practical support, which I didn't even really get into, but I can get into that, for people traveling to that state for abortion. And I'm bad at geography, but I feel like Idaho is like kind of, they touch, right? They have little buddies. I could be wrong, but they're very close. And Idaho's literally about to screw things up. And so here's a state that was like, well, okay, y'all are going to screw things up and it's going to be tough for people, but maybe we can take care of this financial piece. So people just have to deal with like the burden of travel, right? Not the cost of travel. And cities can do that. Austin passed a resolution in their city council that they were going to fund abortion as a city. So this work crosses many levels. You can encourage your local governments, your city councils. I really use abortion as my litmus test. I don't know what your little local, like we have a soil conservation person in North Carolina. I make sure that person is pro-abortion. Like I literally reach out and I'm like, I know soil has nothing to do with abortion, but it might. So I might need to grow my abortion drugs in soil. So yeah, tell me, how do you feel about that? You're not going to criminalize that, right? So just figure out the ways that you can ensure that abortion access just becomes like this central feature in your life. Because even if you never have to have an abortion, it matters to so many people that you know and love. And it's literally a life-saving, life-changing thing that they go through, and they need you. We need you so bad. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Kelsey. So I'm going to change to Spanish. So if you have your headphones, make sure you're on channel 1. Channel 1, everybody. That's where translation is happening. So I'm looking around the room, making sure folks have their headphones on, if you need one. Y vamos a darle la bienvenida a Cupertina. Cupertina viene de la frontera
comes from
México,
the
Estados
border
Unidos,
with Mexico and the United
Viene
States.
haciendo mucho trabajo de
She has
base
done a lot of
alrededor
base building
de los
work
derechos humanos. Como
around
mencionamos, el
human
tema del
rights.
aborto es
As we
conectado
mentioned,
al tema de los
abortion
derechos
is connected to human rights.
Y Cupertino nos va a hablar un poquito
And
más de su
Cupertina is going to talk to us
experiencia
about her
en
experience
términos de cómo
in
llega
terms
a
of
hacer este
how
trabajo,
she has come to do this
de
work,
cómo se organiza el trabajo
how
en ese territorio
this work is organized
y
in
de
that
las
territory,
experiencias
and
que ha adquirido,
the
las lecciones.
experiences that
Así que
she's
bienvenida,
acquired and the
Cupertina.
lessons. So welcome, Cupertina. Thank you so much.
Bueno, les voy a contar un poquito de
I'm gonna tell you a bit
larga
about
historia de que
my
yo viví
the
en
history,
la ciudad
my
de
story.
Matamoros, Tamaulipas.
I
Yo
lived
trabajaba
in
en una
Matamoros.
maquiladora
I worked
y
in
todo
a
estaba muy bien
factory and
cuando
everything was
un día de
fine
repente
when
llega
one
un
day
supervisor nuevo.
suddenly a new
Y
supervisor
sube
arrived
a la banda donde estábamos trabajando
and we went
era
to
una banda que traía como unos barcos así como forma de barcos.
the place
Estaba de
where we
largo
worked,
como
where there was some
de ahí de la
boats,
pared hasta acá.
and it was from like
Entonces,
the size of this
estábamos
wall to that one,
el barco ensamblando,
and
y
we
en
were
eso
assembling
viene
the boat,
el
and then
supervisor
a supervisor
y le
came
sube
and
a la banda.
he goes
Entonces la banda estaba así,
onto
haz de cuenta así.
the wheel, and it
Y
was
yo
going
dije,
like this.
no vamos a poder trabajar en esa,
And I
en
said,
esa
we're not going to
forma.
be able to work like
Dije,
that.
esto se tiene que hacer algo.
We have to do
Y
something
platiqué
about
con
this.
mis compañeras
And I
que
talked
estábamos
to
así al
my
lado, y les
coworkers
digo,
who were
¿ustedes están de
here,
acuerdo
just like
en
this,
que dejemos, no
and I
trabajemos
asked, are
y
we
que
in
se
agreement
siga
that we
pasando
shouldn't work
los barcos así sin el material?
and that we shouldn't
No, pues ya me apoyaron y me dijeron que sí.
pass the
Bueno,
boats like this without material?
entonces
They all told me yes.
viene el
So
supervisor y me
then
dice que
the
por
supervisor
qué no
comes and
estamos
tells me,
trabajando.
asks me, why aren't we
Porque
working?
ustedes nos están
And
pidiendo
I told
calidad.
them, because
En esa
you
forma,
are
ustedes nos
asking
están dando
for
ese
quality, and in the
maquinaria,
same way, you're
que
giving us
está
this
rápido.
machinery
Dije,
that
no
is
vamos a
too
poder
fast.
tener
We're not going to
calidad.
be able to
Y le dije,
have to produce something that is
yo
high quality. I told them.
le dije a mis compañeras,
I told
¿saben
my
qué? ¿Ustedes
coworkers,
están de acuerdo conmigo a que no
you are
trabajemos?
all in agreement with me
Le dije,
that we
yo no
shouldn't
voy a
work.
trabajar si
I told them,
esto no
I'm
le
not
bajan
going
a
to
su
work
normalidad.
if we're not going to make
Entonces
this
se fue el
something that's more
supervisor.
normal. So then the supervisor left.
Se quedaron viendo todas las demás porque qué estaba
And
pasando. Y le dije,
everyone else
¿ustedes
stopped to
me
look at
quieren
what was
apoyar?
happening. I asked the
Apóyenme,
rest of them,
órale.
are you
Está
going
bien,
to
no
support me?
trabajen.
You
Les dije,
come
no
on, support
trabajen
me.
ahí
You need, none of you
su
should work.
trabajo que están haciendo. Y así
You
lo
should
hicieron.
continue to
Luego
do the
la
work that
otra
you're
y la
doing.
otra,
And that's how
hasta
they
que
did it.
se cerró media
Everyone
planta
stopped working
de la
until
fábrica.
half
les
the
dije yo,
factory stopped
Viene
working.
el supervisor y otra vez me
And then the
dice, ¿qué está
supervisor came and
pasando?
asked
¿Por qué
me,
se
what's
pararon?
happening?
Dije,
Why have you
porque
stopped?
al igual que
I
usted
told
vino
them,
y le subió a
in the
esta
same way
planta,
that you
si
came
nosotros
and
estuviéramos
went on
trabajando,
to,
a ellas
came to
también
this
les van a
plant
parar
and told us how to
les van a
work,
subir la velocidad a los barcos, ¿verdad?
you want to
Y
raise
dijo,
the speed on
no,
these
dijo,
boats?
pues te voy a mandar
And
allá
they told
con el
me,
gerente. Pues
I'm
mándeme, no
I'm
tengo
gonna send you to the
pedo. Y el
manager.
gerente me mandó
I
al
told him, send me.
que teníamos, porque
And
nosotros teníamos un jefe del
we had
sindicato.
a union chief,
Llegué yo allá
the head of the
y
union,
que me iban a correr a mí.
and they
Dice, si
took
me
me to
van a correr a
there
mí,
and they
tienen
said that
que
they were going to
correrlas a
fire me.
todas.
And told
Y
them, if you're
ya
going to fire
cuando
me,
llegué,
you need to fire
yo,
everyone.
el gerente
And
llegó,
when the
me
manager
mandó al
came,
sindicato. Y le dije al
they sent me
líder
to the
de ahí del
union,
sindicato, le dije, es que de esa manera
and
no vamos a poder trabajar. Si
I
ellos
told
nos
the
están pidiendo
leader of the
calidad,
union that we can't work like
¿por qué
this.
nos
If they're
tienen como
if they're
caricaturas
asking
ahí
us for
haciendo el
high quality
trabajo?
work, then why do they have us like
Pero en
cartoons
ese
here
tiempo yo no
doing the job?
sabía
But at
que
that
ese
time, I
era
didn't
el
know
líder,
that
sino que
this
hasta cuando
was
yo
a
llegué
leader.
y
When
con
I
el que era el jefe
arrived
del
and
sindicato,
the
me dijo que
union
si yo
leader
quería
asked me if I
que me
wanted
daban la
to,
indemnización a mí. Dije, no,
if they
si me
if
la va a dar a mí,
he
me
gave
la va a dar a todas.
the administration to
yo.
me, I
Y
said
ya
no.
de allí
If you're
yo,
gonna give it to me, you
dijo,
need to give it to
me
everyone.
dijo el del sindicato, me dijo,
And then
esas son las
the
mujeres
union
que a
leader
mí
told
me
me,
gusta tener
these are the
como
women
líderes.
that I like to have as
Y
leaders.
en ese
And
momento,
at that
yo
moment, I
volví a la planta,
I
volví a
went back to the
trabajar
plant.
como
I
siempre.
went back to work as I
Pero
always did.
hay veces que tenemos,
there
yo
are
no sabía lo
times
que era eso, ser líder. Yo
I didn't
no
know
sabía,
what that
hasta
was
que yo
about,
entré
what it meant to be a leader.
con las poderosas,
Until
por decir, las líderes de las poderosas
I
de la RAL de Texas.
I knew
yo
the
dije,
powerful leaders
cuando
of
dijeron así, que empezaron,
Texas.
pues si yo desde cuando
said,
ya era
well,
una líder,
since when
yo
am
no
I a
sabía,
leader?
me di
And I didn't even
cuenta que
know.
yo era una líder.
I realized that I was a
Y-
leader.
Y luego de allí para acá,
And
ahora
since that moment
yo
until
soy
now, I
una
am
que hace juntas comunitarias a mi
someone
colonia.
who does
Voy a otras
community
colonias
work. I go to
hablarles
different
sobre sus derechos,
to
sobre lo
different
que tienen
places
que
to talk
hacer,
about
sobre
their rights
si
and what they
tienen
need to
hijos,
do,
no los
if they
tienen,
have
que si
children
quieren
or they
abortar,
don't, if they
son
want
libres
to
de
have an
hacer lo que ellas decidan.
abortion, that
Y yo les
they need
dije,
to do what they need to make the
ustedes
decisions that's best for them.
tienen que seguir
I tell
adelante,
them, you have to keep
adelante.
going forward.
Ustedes no se
You
intimiden por las demás gente.
shouldn't be
Ustedes
scared,
tienen que tener
intimidated
su
by other
propia
people.
actividad
You need to
de
have
decidir
your
por
own
sí
dignity
misma.
to decide for yourselves.
Háganlo para que
Do
ustedes
it
salgan
so that
adelante.
you can
Y ahora
can
Tengo una
advance.
comunidad
And
tan buena
now I
y
have
que me
such a
estiman
good
tanto que yo las
community
quiero
that
como
I
mis
really
hermanas,
love,
porque
and I
son como
care
mis
for them
hermanas
as my
ahí
sisters. They're like my sisters in these
les
moments.
digo, ustedes no se dejen,
And I told them,
ustedes
you
sigan
shouldn't
adelante,
let
luchen
them
por
do
lo que
things to
ustedes
you. You
quieran.
should continue to
Y
go
les voy
forward
a hablar
and fight for the
también
things that you
un
want.
poquito de lo del aborto.
I'm also going to
Miren,
talk a little bit about abortion.
Yo el aborto yo les digo, ustedes
Around abortion, I tell
van a
them,
decidir su cuerpo,
you
no que la demás
all
gente
need
le decida
to
su cuerpo a
decide for
ustedes.
your bodies. You don't need to let other
Tenemos
people
que seguir
decide
luchando para que
about
haya esas,
make decisions about your own
esos,
body, and we need to continue to fight
clínicas
so that
que son,
those clinics that
para que hagan el acceso al aborto,
that are giving
porque
people
todo
access
ser
to
humano
abortions,
tiene derecho a tener
every human being
esas-
has the right to
mm,
have
esos cuidados médicos.
has the right to health
La
care,
palabra.
right? I forgot the word.
Esos cuidados médicos para que no
This is
mueran más mujeres,
healthcare,
porque hay mujeres
because
que han muerto
there are
por
women
un
who
aborto
have
que se lo
died
hacen
for an abortion
clandestinamente
and try to
porque
do
las
it
clínicas no los quieren
secret
atender.
because the clinics don't want to attend them.
Y ahora voy con otro tema.
And now I'm going to talk about a different
Acerca del
topic
LGBTQ,
around
de las personas que
LGBTQ
son
and people who
homosexuales o como
are
les llamen, ¿verdad?
queer, or
Yo
however you
voy
say
a
it.
dar un poquito de un testimonio que
I'm going to give
tengo
you a
de
little
mi
bit of
sobrino, que la pasó
testimony
muy
around
mal.
my nephew
lloraba.
who had a
Él
really tough
estaba
time.
casi como
He
ya
cried. He
queriendo
was
suicidarse.
he had
Entonces,
suicidal thoughts.
Yo me armé de valor
And so
y
I
hablé con mi hermano
armed
porque
myself
mi hermano no
with
sabía
valor, and I talked to my
y
brother
cuando él
because my
supo,
brother didn't know,
él se
and
enojó tanto con
when
él
he found out, he got
que yo
really
dije,
mad at his
mira,
at my nephew,
ven
at
hermano,
his
le digo,
son. And I
nosotros
told my brother,
tenemos que
come here.
aceptarlos
We have
tal
to
y como
accept
Dios nos los
each other
mandó.
just
Tú
as
no
God made
dejes
us. You
que otra
shouldn't let
gente
other
te llene la
people
cabeza
fill your head
de que
with,
porque es esto, porque es lo otro.
oh, this and that.
Tú vas a decidir
You
por
need to
tu hijo.
decide for your son.
¿Y qué creen?
And what do
Lo
you all think?
aceptó
Yes, he
a mi
accepted him.
sobrino.
He accepted my
Él ya
nephew.
lloraba, ya estaba
He was already
mal.
crying, and
Como yo no iba para allá en ese
he was
tiempo,
in a bad
yo
state.
por
And
teléfono.
since I didn't travel there at that time,
no
I
te
used to talk to him on the phone, and I
de
would tell
miedo.
him,
Habla con tu
my
padre,
child, you
habla
shouldn't
con tu
be
mamá.
scared. Talk
tus
to your
hermanas.
father, to your mother,
Eran
and
hermanas
to
las que tenía él.
your sisters.
Y dije, habla con
And I
ellas,
told him,
diles,
talk to them and tell them,
platícales.
talk to them.
No te vayas por otras personas que no te
Don't
van a entender.
follow other people who are not
Y
going
ya
to
cuando dijo,
understand
sí,
you.
pero es que mi papá,
And
dije, yo
when
voy
he
a
said,
hablar con tu papá.
no, but it's not my dad,
Y
I
ya
said,
fue
I'm
cuando
going
yo
to talk to
hablé
your
con mi
father.
hermano
And
y ya,
then when I spoke to
ya
my
aceptó.
brother and he
Ahora
accepted
mi
his son,
sobrino es feliz
now my nephew is happy
porque ya lo
because
aceptaron tal como es.
he's been accepted as he
yo
is.
Estoy orgullosa
And I
de
am
eso.
proud of that.
Yo no sabía que era líder,
I
ahora
didn't
ya
know
lo
that I
sé.
was a leader, but
Y
now I know.
Aparte que
And
yo
apart from that,
me gusta
I like
darles consejos a los
to
jóvenes,
give
a las
advice
muchachas,
to
y a
the
personas,
youth,
señoras que
to
sufren de
women,
la
and to
violencia doméstica por
those who
los
suffer
hombres que
from
no las aceptan, o
domestic
que se
abuse from
hacen, que van a
men
los
who don't
doctores,
accept
porque hay
them or
personas todavía
who
en
make them go to
en
doctors,
tiempo,
because there
hay
are,
personas
even
que
now,
les
there are
quitan
people
el
who
derecho de ir a un
take
doctor.
who will take the right for
Y eso
women to
no
wait
es,
to go to a
eso
doctor,
no
and
es.
that's
Yo les he
not.
dicho a las mujeres,
I've told women,
su cuerpo es de ustedes
your
y ustedes
body
van a
is
decidir
yours,
por
and you
ustedes,
are
no
going
por
to
el
decide
esposo
for
ni por
yourself, not for
nadie
your
más,
husband or
porque
for
las que
anyone
van
else,
a
because
sufrir son
the
ustedes,
ones who are going to
no los
suffer
otros,
are
las demás
you,
personas que
not the
alrededor
rest of
que
the
se
people who
niegan
are
a
around
tener
you,
esa,
who are
se niegan
who
a tener esas
don't
facilidades de su cuerpo.
who don't have
Por
this
ustedes
same
mismas, háganlo.
access to the same
Y igual que los
rights to their
jóvenes, yo
body.
también les
And the
digo a
same
las
thing,
mujeres,
I say the same thing to
yo
the
les digo,
youth and
ustedes
to women.
Ustedes son dueños de su cuerpo.
You
Pueden
are,
hacer lo que ustedes quieren con
you
su
you
cuerpo.
own your bodies. You
Sean
can do whatever you
felices.
want with your
No
body. You
sean
should be
amargados
happy. Don't
por
be
otras
sour
personas que les están,
because of other people
les
who
están,
are
hablando mal.
uh,
No,
talking badly to you.
digo, ustedes tienen que luchar
I
por
tell them
ustedes
you have to
mismos.
fight
Y así
for
como yo te
yourselves,
estoy
and
diciendo a ti,
yeah, just like I'm
tienes
telling you
que
now, you have
saber
to know that
cómo entrar a eso. Únete,
you have to
únete
know
a
how
nosotros.
to
Nosotros
do it.
luchamos
Join
por
us,
todos
join us.
ustedes
We
para
are
que
fighting for
ustedes
all of
también
you,
tienen
so
que
that, but you
entrar con
also
nosotros
have
para
to
que tengan fuerzas
um,
de
join us so that you can
y
continue to have
hacernos más
strength to
grandes
continue
para
fighting and
poder
so that we're
sacar todo
all
eso de
much bigger,
las personas que están
and
equivocadas,
so
pero
that we can
ellos
change the
son los
minds of those who are
equivocados.
wrong, but they're the ones who are wrong about us. Cupertina, one question, really quickly. Who are
Pues
the ones who are
por eso
powerful?
somos las latinas.
The ones who are powerful are
Instituto de Latinas de Texas.
the Latinas, Texas Institute of Latinas.
Antes yo le decía a mi jefa, a Lucy Ceballos, pero ahora me dicen, no me digas jefa, tú eres jefa ahora de tu comunidad.
Now they tell me you are the chief of your community, the boss of your community.
All right, I'm gonna switch up. So y'all, you can take the headphones off. Cupertina, se puede poner sus audífonos. And we're gonna hear from our last, but definitely not least, panelist, Anka from Audrey Lorde Project. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. So amazing to hear from everybody today. I feel like I'm letting everything wash over me. So grateful. And I'm here today I'm going to reiterate the same thing at the beginning and at the end for dramatic effect, which is I'm here to just talk about how trans justice is reproductive justice, and reproductive justice is trans justice. Period. Full stop. That's it, right? That's the thesis. That's what I think about before I go to sleep every night. Trans justice is reproductive justice. So when we talk about reproductive justice, right, we're obviously talking about the fight for abortion and everything else beyond. And fundamentally, as everybody here has spoken about already, it's about bodily autonomy. We should be able to have children. We should be able to not have children. And we should be able to parent the children that we do have with safety and dignity, always, no matter who you are, where you are. And, you know, it's a hard time to do that for everybody, really. You know, there are, you know, I'm here talking about like TGNC folks, trans and gender nonconforming people. I'm also going to use the phrase gender expansive to refer to this group. But TGNC people have always experienced barriers to care, all kinds of care. Healthcare, there was a blanket, did you all know this? Because I did not. There was a blanket ban on trans healthcare being covered by Medicare. For many, many years. It was introduced in the 90s, and it was just repealed in New York in 2014. And that meant that trans people could not get any gender-affirming surgeries, could not get any hormone replacement therapy. Even after it was repealed, there was pretty severe limitations on what people would be able to access, right? So trans healthcare, just physical access to, I need, you know, hormones, I need surgery, whatever, only became a reality for low-income folks very recently. And that's, you know, New York State, right? And when we think about TGNC community, we are statistically more likely to be low income, to be on Medicare, to be housing insecure, to be discriminated against in all walks of life, including in the healthcare system. So when TGNC people are seeking abortions, We see the compounded effect of anti-trans discrimination and anti-abortion discrimination, of course. So we know that people are discriminated against, denied health care, misgendered, dead name, invalidated, refused care entirely in abortion clinics and across all healthcare, right? So trans care itself is reproductive justice, always. And when we are thinking about like abortion care for TGNC people, I think, it's kind of like in vogue now in like the recent years to be like, oh, we're just gonna say pregnant people and that's like it, right? That's our trans activism for today. And it's not sufficient, right? It's not sufficient because we need the analysis. Bodily autonomy is being snatched from trans people as we speak, right? We are watching this happen across the country where in Texas, right, where we're seeing SB 8 anti-abortion bill. It is not a coincidence that like several months after that happened, they start targeting trans kids, right? And criminalizing trans kids and criminalizing parents who are supportive of their children, of their trans children. We are seeing attacks on critical race theory, right, across the board. And that is not divorced from abortion or from trans people. It's all about, we don't lead single issue lives, right, as Audrey Lorde says. And critical race theory, trans kids, abortion are all about erasing marginalized people, right? You don't get to know your history. You don't get to get the care that you need. And you are also stigmatized and like put further in a corner every single time you try, right? And the right has long known this. The thing is, I think it's very easy to be like, oh, the right is stupid, right? Like they don't know what they're doing, blah, 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 blah. They're just like so ignorant and terrible and that's it. The right is very tactical. They have created this strategy over decades of we're gonna chip away, right? When we think about campaigns, when we think about power, when we have a target, you're trying to chip away at them over years, right, of cumulative things. It is not a coincidence that this is all happening right now because it was a targeted attack over decades and decades of this work. So I have lost myself in my fury at this, actually. So, thinking about Oklahoma. So I think some folks were talking about an abortion, there's an abortion ban that is like going through their legislature now. And it bans, it talks specifically about fertilization, I think you were mentioning. Fertilization, I don't even know how you could ban abortion from fertilization. It is literally one cell, two cells hanging off the side of your endometrial lining for dear life, right? There's nothing there. But that idea of saying that we're gonna regulate it from this point on, right? What does that mean moving forward? If you are regulating people's fertilization, who's not to say that you're gonna regulate who has sex with who, which is already a thing, obviously. Who's to say that you're not gonna start outlawing birth control, right? And Plan B outright. And I think what's really interesting in this law is that there's specific language about trans people, not validating that trans people exist. It's talking about this would be true for everyone whose biological sex is female, regardless of, and there was some really shady language in there that was like, of a gender that they believe themselves to be or something, right? So like gaslighting of trans people written into an anti-abortion law, it's not a coincidence. And so, we think about, again, like anti-trans legislation that has been targeting really specifically trans youth. Arkansas was the big one, like last year. In the spring, they outlawed gender-affirming treatment for trans youth overall, right? And that was something that has been the subject of that kind of court back and forth, which is another tactic of the right. They exhaust our resources, they exhaust our labor, our time, our energy, our mobilization at the court level, interpersonally, at clinics, when you're defending clinics, like everywhere. This is a targeted strategy to wear down the movement, right? And then, so all of this, right, it's about consolidating power. It's not about, it's about bodily autonomy, and then it's about, we want to look good for our midterms, and we want people to elect us. so that we can continue to do more terrible things. And I think it's important also to think about like the wins, right? They're few and far in between, to be honest. But for example, in New York State, we have pretty good legislation. It could be better, it could always be better, but the Reproductive Health Act that was passed in 2019, right? And that was kind of in response to that big like red wave that we were seeing at the time. And before that, the New York State abortion law had not been updated in 50 years. So it was before Roe v. Wade was the last time New York State had updated it. Now this provision means that abortion will no longer be regulated as a crime, and it codifies protections even if like Roe v. Wade is overturned at the federal level, which is the exact opposite of what many states have been doing when they've been enacting trigger laws, which would criminalize it out of hand as soon as Roe v. Wade is overturned, right? And you know, our community, when we think about trans folks will have had abortions since the beginning of time, as everyone who needs an abortion has, and we will continue to. But I think what all of this is making me think about is how, you know, the legislature, the like legal system is like not going to save us. Like it's a really hard pill to swallow, but we are watching how we have like poured so much resource into that kind of fight, and it has been failing, right? Because it's designed to. It was not built for us, so why would it succeed? So, you know, at the Audrey Lorde Project, where I work, we're a community organizing center. We work with queer and trans people of color in New York City, especially in central Brooklyn. And so within community, we know that we have always needed abortions, we will always need abortions. What does it look like for community to mobilize and like give us the resources that we need, right? I think one of the things that has been coming up a lot is full spectrum doulas and abortion doulas, right? As an intervention, a peer-to-peer intervention. Doulas, for those who don't know, are people who provide support and advocacy for people during pregnancy, during childbirth, and also for abortions. So for TGNC folks who may be experiencing denial of care, who may be experiencing gaslight, misgendering, you know, completely ignored. You can like call up a clinic and you will be like, oh, I'm trans, and they won't even let you finish the sentence, right? They're gonna be like, oh, we don't do that, right? Because the idea of trans care is so caught up in it's just about hormones or it's just about this. Not that trans people are also people with bodies who need a full spectrum of services, including abortion. So I think doulas are like a really excellent intervention like in community because they can provide that kind of extra advocacy and support for trans and gender nonconforming people who are just trying to get the care that they need. And another thing that I really admire is in Louisiana, there's a group called Rejack NOLA, right? And they're one of those, I'm such a fan of them, oh my goodness. They are not like explicitly like TGNC, but they serve people who are also, you know, who are not straight, who are not cis, all of these things, and especially young people. And they deliver Plan B for free. So like, it's like your plug, your Plan B plug, and you just like text them, and then they roll up with Plan B for free, and then they drop it off, and that's that. And so thinking about, you know, and that came out of Louisiana having a conscious clause, right? So people, a pharmacist could deny you Plan B because if it goes against their religious beliefs, right? So completely arbitrary control over Plan B. They were like, you know what? That's not it. So we're just going to create our own community network to get people Plan B when they need it. And I think, you know, looking to things like that, looking to orgs like Just the Pill in Minnesota that like mails, you know, the drugs that you need for your abortion. I think that is gonna be the way forward. Like we really do have to think about organizing community-based strategies to get people the care that they need. And then the last thing that I will say is just like thinking locally, right? I think in New York, we're like in like the good, the like better abortion policy like state, right? But that is not, I think better, it can make us become complacent, right? Because it is not perfect. There are still many strides to go. And when you think about TGNC people who, you know, for sure, like a few years ago on Medicare are able to access, you know, better healthcare, or be able to access healthcare. It didn't mean that they were actually able to access good healthcare, that we are able to access good healthcare. It just means that I won't deny your claim, right, with Medicare if you need something. But now we're seeing issues with like implementation because places are not TGNC competent, and abortion clinics are not. I think there are many that are trying to be and getting there in many ways, and then there are many that are just not giving what they need to give, honestly. So some of the work that we're doing at the Audrey Lord Project now is a campaign called Brick by Brick, which is primarily a housing and healthcare access campaign for TGNC people. TGNC people on Medicare can access a doctor now, but they don't always actually have a safe doctor to go to or someone who knows what they're talking about or who can give them the services that they're asking for. People assume things all the time. Transmasculine people are at an 8 times higher risk of an abnormal pap smear. That's alarm bells, right? But there's like one study about it, and like there's no clinical guidance around this sort of stuff at all. So if you are interested in thinking about TGNC housing and healthcare in New York City, ALP is a place to check out because we are hosting a town hall on April 12th. To think about directions for that brick by brick campaign, right? Like what do TGNC people, and even more specifically TGNC people of color in New York, need in order to have the healthcare, the housing, the dignity, and the safety that we all deserve? And it's been, a long fight. It will continue to be, but I think that looking to community-based strategies for how we're gonna get free is really the way. The courts are not doing it. These politicians are not doing it. They will bicker all they want, and we will be caught up in it. We donate our money, we donate our time, but what does it look like to really turn into community, right? And lean into community, because we have everything that we need. And I'm gonna say, my dramatic end, trans justice is reproductive justice, and reproductive justice is trans justice, and that is the thesis. That's it.
Thank you so much for that, Anka. So we mentioned in the beginning, we have an interpreter in the back. Shout outs to Ruben. And it's been a little bit over an hour of Ruben interpreting. And so we want to be able to relieve our interpreter. And we have the open mic session that is coming up next. Our speakers are going to be roaming around, so folks could always come up to folk and talk to folk. That I encourage that. That helps, especially we've been on virtual life for a while. So if we have people close to us, we might as well talk to them, right? So don't get scared and speak to the speakers, ask questions, connect with folks. I think it's really important, some of the things that were highlighted as a way to fight back. Sometimes we talk about fighting back and we're not really specific about how that looks. Mm-hmm. And I think the development of community strategies is the only thing that has always saved our communities. Mm-hmm. We've always saved each other. Mm-hmm. Resistance is built, survival is developed, and we're here. And we continue to struggle, and we'll continue to struggle until the system is another system, not reformed, another system, because there's no reforming capitalism. There's no reforming patriarchy, and that's the systems that we are currently living under. And so, again, the development of community strategies, the development of relationships across lines of division, the unity of the working class, those are some of the things that we need to be able to develop and work in building consistently and live that life to be able to have generations be able to live properly and in dignity. And so I appreciate you all. We appreciate you all. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for coming. Stick around for the open mic. We're going to take a couple minutes to make the shift. So he is giving me the yes, please. But stick around. Thank y'all for coming, and thank y'all for tuning in.